how I like to shorthand these things. I'm going to call this market flat, but technically the Dow is on course to have its first gain of the week. This is what's driving the day so far. The Fed makes its move as Jerome Powell says things look good, but not perfect. Oil prices, meantime, still near records as Donald Trump warns of more sanctions on Iran. And time to make a deal. Britain's Prime Minister meets the U.S. President this hour. It's Wednesday, September the 26th. I'm Paula Newton, and this is Preston's Business. Good evening. As always, we will have the day's business news for you in just a moment. But first tonight, the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court may be unraveling as new allegations emerge against Donald Trump's pick to be the next Supreme Court justice. Now, another woman has now come forward accusing Kavanaugh of inappropriate behavior while she was in high school, while he and she were in high school. She says she attended well over 10 parties where Kavanaugh was present and saw him, quote, engage in abusive and physically aggressive behavior towards girls. Kavanaugh will deny any wrongdoing in this testimony to the Senate tomorrow, and President Trump is already calling the new claims ridiculous. Top Republicans, meantime, insist Thursday's hearing in Washington will still go ahead as scheduled. Following all of this for us is Caitlin Collins. She joins me now from Washington, where I believe the president has headed, if he hasn't already arrived from New York. What is he making of these newest allegations? Of course, the lawyer, Michael Avenatti, who is also the lawyer for Stormy Daniels, had said that he had these kinds of accusations that he would present.
He did. He warned that it would come out in the next 36 hours. And of course, we see President Trump now attacking Michael Avenatti directly for the first time since Michael Avenatti has been in the public eye, representing that woman who says she had an affair with President Trump. And now that he has come out representing a woman who is accusing his Supreme Court nominee of sexual misconduct, President Trump is more than happy to go on the defense and go after Michael Avenatti, which we saw him do in New York at the United Nations General Assembly while seated next to the Prime Minister of Japan, saying that he was a third-rate lawyer, saying he did not believe the latest round of accusations made against Brett Kavanaugh, and that this is all part of a Democratic scheme to upend his nomination to the Supreme Court. So that is what we're witnessing. President Trump is taking Brett Kavanaugh's defense into his own hands, and that comes after we had sources telling us that President Trump didn't believe Brett Kavanaugh was being forceful enough in his defense. He watched that interview that Brett Kavanaugh did seated next to his wife on Monday night, and he didn't think he was aggressive enough in defending himself. So now we've seen President Trump really take the reins into his own hands, going after several of the women who have accused Brett Kavanaugh. The first woman saying Christine Blasey Ford would have reported these actions to the authorities if they were as bad as she says they were, saying the second woman, Deborah Ramirez, admits that she was intoxicated at the time of the alleged incident. And now with the third woman, he is going after the lawyer who is representing her. So it is an all-out, full-frontal defense from the White House at this point to keep their nominee. And what we're hearing from people who are with President Trump in New York is that he is going to stand by him. Right now, he's still behind his nomination. There is no intention to withdraw it. And the thing is, we'll likely hear more from President Trump, even more than we've already heard today, when he holds that press conference here in New York in a few hours. That is something that President Trump decided to do because he wanted to continue to be able to defend his nominee against what he says are just the Democrats attempting to go after the president, not necessarily Brett Kavanaugh, but go after the president and try to upend his agenda here by derailing this nomination.
Yeah, and Caitlin, I was clearly mistaken there. He is still here in New York. As you said, a lot going on this hour. He's meeting with Theresa May in just a few minutes from now, and then we'll have that all-important press conference at 5 o'clock. What's interesting here, though, is that the president and his aides had said that perhaps Brett Kavanaugh wasn't aggressive enough. Perhaps he wasn't categorical enough. If you take it away from the Oval Office and to those all-important Republicans in Congress right now, in terms of those people that will have to give that seal of approval to his nomination, what are they thinking about yet another woman coming up with these kinds of allegations?
Well, it truly depends on who you ask. If you look at Senator Lindsey Graham, an ally of the president who is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, will be there present for that testimony tomorrow. He is growing angrier and angrier the more that these allegations are emerging, the more that they are increasing. We heard from him saying that people are trying to portray Brett Kavanaugh as a serial rapist. That is a phrase he used multiple times, saying that he does not believe the claims and that if they allow the claims from someone like Michael Avenatti to derail this nominee, that Republicans deserve their fate. Now, on the other side of the aisle, with someone who is undecided about their vote for Judge Kavanaugh, Senator Susan Collins, she's offering no comment on this, but we did see her conferring with another senator, Senator Jeff Flake, who was also undecided after this third allegation and this third woman emerged to come forward with her story. So the question is, how are they going to feel? It is really up to a very small handful of senators what is going to happen to Brett Kavanaugh. A lot of them are already decided. The Democrats have decided they're going to vote against him. A lot of Republicans have decided they're going to vote for him. But there is a small group that is undecided right now, and it really depends, according to them, on what Christine Blasey Ford says tomorrow. Brings forward a whole new round of questions about whether or not the second and third accuser also deserve a chance to be heard at this hearing, and if it's even fair to Judge Kavanaugh if he doesn't have a chance in an open setting in front of Congress to rebut those accusations as well. So a lot of drama unfolding here in Washington, but for right now, the White House is sticking by their Supreme Court nominee.
Sticking by and trying to get him through, obviously, before those all-important midterm elections. Again, it remains to be seen as to whether or not those Republicans will again start to side with the Democrats, who are asking, of course, for that FBI investigation now into 3 allegations yet unproven. Our Caitlin Collins there with that update in Washington. Appreciate it. We are going to turn back to what is an incredibly busy day of business news as well, and it has a healthy side of politics to it. It is the final hour of trade. Investors are digesting the Fed's rate rise and its bullish economic forecast in a decision with implications for lenders, borrowers, yes, your mortgage, the global economy, and President Trump, who has bashed the Fed for raising rates. Now, moments ago, the Fed chair said he's doing what's best for all Americans and trying to ignore the political pressure.
We have disparate points of view, which we debate extensively and come to a perspective and try to set monetary policy to achieve maximum employment in a context of price stability. That's what we do. We don't consider political factors or things like that. And so that's who we are, that's what we do, and that's just the way it's always going to be for us.
That was a fairly strong pushback, but you could hardly expect anything else from Jay Powell at this point. They are supposed to be impartial. Let's get back to today's rate. That rise was the 3rd this year. The Fed believes it won't be, though, the last, and that's significant. Rates are expected to be about 2.4% by the end of this year, with further increases both in 2019 and 2020. Remember that December rate rise, perhaps maybe January, is already baked in. Now, rate rises prevent the economy from overheating, right? They're supposed to be that stopgap measure against inflation. But they also make the United States a much more expensive place to invest. Remember, even though the Fed makes its decisions independently, President Trump has appointed many of those decision makers. It's his job. That's the chairman, Jay Powell, seen here maybe perhaps in happier times. President Trump criticized Powell's predecessor, Janet Yellen, for keeping rates low. Then there's the Fed board. There are, get this, and this is significant, still 3 vacancies, and President Trump has nominated 3 people to fill those slots. They will join Jay Powell and 2 other Trump nominees who have already been confirmed. There's just one other person on the board, Obama nominee, Layla Brainard. Now, joining me is Joseph Gagnon. He served as Associate Director on the Fed board. He's now a Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. We want to turn first to the politics. It's not something that we're used to saying. Even it's a mouthful in terms of the Fed decision. Could you expect Jay Powell to say anything else other than the fact that, look, we try not to engage in politics, even though perhaps the president would like him to be more dovish?
He couldn't say anything else. And in fact, I've sat through those meetings, and they don't ever discuss political considerations. Of course, they're in the back of their minds, obviously, but they don't discuss them. So they don't enter in a formal discussion.
I know that you have experience in this, obviously, in your former roles with the Fed, but you know what we're all thinking. You're not talking about it around the table, but everyone's actions come under suspicion, especially with that amount of pressure from the president.
Well, the interesting thing, I think, is that President Trump has named nominees for the committee. Some have gotten through, some are still waiting. But they're all people that are seen as reasonably independent and credible officials. So I think it's going to be hard for him, because once they're appointed, they can't be removed. They have a fixed term. So given the people he's appointed, I think it'll be hard. I actually believe them when they say they will not let political considerations sway them.
And likely why Jay Powell can speak with such confidence to that. I want to talk about the actual Fed rate itself. They have removed that language saying they're accommodative. Why is that significant, and what does it mean for basically this soft landing on interest rates that everybody is hoping for?
Well, it means that they're getting within a margin of error to where they think the neutral rate for the economy is. So they decided to remove that term because they couldn't be sure, although they're still at the low end of what that range is, but they couldn't be sure, so they thought, let's take that term out.
And a lot of people pointed to that, though, and just saying, why do that now? Why do you think they decided to do that now? They didn't need to.
They didn't need to, and I wouldn't have been surprised if they had waited one more time. So I think this may be a slightly dovish message in the sense that they're saying that there may not be that much farther to go. Although, interestingly, the actual path of interest rates they're projecting is, if anything, a slight bit higher than before. But not much.
And I want to get to that. You know, you wrote in June that you thought that perhaps the projections on inflation were perhaps, in your words, that inflation will rise more than the FOMC projects in 2019 and 2020. You're speaking to the choir here. I still think they do not have a good read on inflation. But what does your educated opinion tell you about inflation and how quickly it can really rise?
Well, I think I agree with you that inflation is going up more than they're projecting, and there was some tough questions at the press conference just now about that. Chairman Powell's answer was that he thinks that the effect of this excess overheating economy, which is not that strong, I mean, it's slightly overheating. He thinks that effect is very small and slow. That's his answer. I think he's going to be a bit faster than they think, and I think maybe, but not overwhelming. I mean, I think even a year from now, I don't think inflation will be at 3 yet, but it will be above 2.
It will be interesting just to see how all of that flushes out, as well as some people start to see those indicators. A lot to talk about there. Thanks so much. We will get on with it here on Quest Means Business, but we'll hope to have you back. Appreciate it. Now, we will turn to that reaction on Wall Street. The Dow spiked at 2 p.m. as the Fed announced its decision, but it's now settled back down to reality. Our Allison Cossack is at the New York Stock Exchange now. Allison, in terms of the market reaction, this was quite tepid. It basically had zero reaction. It was as quiet, it seemed, a few minutes after the Fed decision as it was a few hours ago when I was there. This is pretty much what most had expected, right?
This is really exactly what everybody expected. Now, we did see the Dow reach its highs of the session. We saw the Dow up around 113 points higher than where it was before the Fed announcement. We're seeing those gains certainly fizzle out, but you're seeing the Fed decision really baked into the trade, especially the trade today and the trade really throughout the past several months. Now, the expectations are the same as before the Fed came out with this announcement. There's going to be one more rate hike this year. That's going to happen in December, and then 3 more next year. So really no deviation from those expectations. I did see a little bit of focus on that word accommodative. There was some talk about what exactly did Fed Chair Powell really mean by that, but it looks like everybody's kind of settling in, thinking that the word accommodative was something that was used during the financial crisis, and now that word has been kicked out of the Fed statement, and now we're seeing that gradual increase of interest rates. And the way many are interpreting are that there's a lot of confidence in the strength of the U.S. economy, that inflation is relatively stable at this point, unemployment is low, and we are seeing economic growth strong in the U.S. So overall, you're seeing a positive reaction to the Fed decision. No surprises here. Paula?
And before I let you go, Allison, could a good environment for IPOs right now, and SurveyMonkey that went public certainly believes it is a good environment.
Yeah, so this is a software company that uses digital survey and analytics services. It was priced at $12. It's right now trading at around $18, over 50% of that IPO price. Interestingly enough, this is a company that's yet to turn a profit, but the interest in this IPO was super strong. And once again, you can see it in the way it's trading right now, 50% above its IPO price. I talked with the CEO of SurveyMonkey, Xander Laurie, earlier today, and talked about the company. I also talked about its all-star board. One of the people sitting on the board, Serena Williams. Listen to this.
First off, she is a winner. This is a person who took on an industry 20 years ago and has been dominating it. I think she embodies grit